It is officially Russia's biggest confrontation with the West since the Cold War. Over the weekend, Russian forces seized Crimea, the Black Sea Peninsula in the southeast of Ukraine. And some breaking news, Russia is now demanding that Ukraine surrender 2 Ukrainian warships in Crimea. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry says Russians ordered the crew to surrender within the hour or face Russians storming and seizing the ships and crew. Now, on Saturday, Putin secured permission from Russia's parliament to use military force to, quote, protect Russian citizens in Ukraine. As Russian troops, crossed the border, Putin invoked the same justification he used to launch the 2008 invasion of Georgia. This happened again in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Ukraine mobilized its troops for war on Sunday as Washington threatened to isolate Russia economically after President Putin declared he had the right to invade. Now, this is how Ukraine's new prime minister reacted.
This is the red alert. This is not the threat. This is actually the declaration of war to my country. We are on the brink of the disaster. There was no any reason for the Russian Federation to invade Ukraine. And we believe that our Western partners and the entire global community will support the territorial integrity and unity of Ukraine.
Poland has thrown itself into the fray as well. It is admitted to moving tanks and troops to take up positions along its border with Ukraine, but insists it is simply part of a previously scheduled exercise. In a rare open meeting, a second emergency session was convened on Saturday at the United Nations in New York. While there was no agreement, there were a lot of accusations. Here's what the Ukrainian ambassador to the UN had to say.
We urge all member states of the United Nations to demonstrate solidarity with the Ukrainian nation to protect sovereignty and territorial integrity of the country, to protect the very basic principles of the United Nations, currently brutally violated by a permanent permanent member of the Security Council.
Meanwhile, Russia's ambassador acknowledged Putin had asked for authorization for a military force, but emphasized they have yet to send forces. He also felt it was important to make this distinction.
I'd like to draw your attention to the fact it says on the territory of Ukraine, not against Ukraine, as my Ukrainian colleague said, until the normalization of the political situation in this country.
Samantha Power, America's ambassador to the UN, responded in kind.
Actions speak louder than words. Early this morning, the Russian Duma acted to authorize the use of military force in Ukraine. This is as dangerous as it is destabilizing. We are deeply disturbed by reports this morning of Russian military intervention into Crimea. This intervention is without legal basis. Indeed, it violates Russia's commitment to protect the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence of Ukraine. It is time for the Russian intervention in Ukraine to end.
But it's not just diplomats discussing the troubling developments in Ukraine. Twitter data on Twitter sent out a link to the Twitter conversation about Ukraine as it spread throughout the month of February. Just take a look. This is from the beginning of February. As you can see the ticker moving to the right, you see the conversation swelling around the world. But take a look how the conversation grows on the 19th. Currently, we're on 18, and there you have the 19th. Now that Russia is in control of a majority of Crimea, the focus has shifted to eastern parts of Ukraine, where most ethnic Ukrainians speak Russian as a native language. Protests continued during the weekend as Russian flags were hoisted above government buildings. And on Monday, around 2,000 pro-Russian demonstrators occupied the first floor of the regional government building in Ukraine's city of Donetsk. They chanted slogans including Russia, Berkut, shame, shame to the government. Speakers also called out to the crowd, asking who in attendance was Russian. And as you can see, people raised their hands in agreement. So, Maxim, we're seeing obviously a divide. And David, this morning Russia's Prime Minister Medvedev spoke to U.S. Vice President Joe Biden. We know Obama and Putin spoke at length, I think, for 90 minutes over this weekend. I mean, how serious is this escalation, especially as Maxim outlines all those divisions and potential divisions? I mean, is war inevitable? Is Ukraine at war with Russia?
Well, it looks to me like war may break out, and it may break out very soon. If the Russians have told the Ukrainian garrisons to surrender, and if they don't surrender, and if the Russians then use force and people are killed, In the present situation, it seems to me that it's very likely that armed confrontations will result between Russians and Ukrainians. It's a deliberate attack on Ukrainian territory in violation of their sovereignty. It's hard to see what else they can do.
And David, with that in mind, Ukraine launched a treason case on Sunday after firing the head of the Navy, who surrendered his headquarters in the Crimean port of Sevastopol on his second day on the job. Denis Berezovsky was shown, as you can see right here on Russian television, swearing allegiance to the pro-Russian regional leaders of Crimea. Maxim, when you look at this footage, based on what David just said about war seeming inevitable, I mean, how significant is this? Just 2 days in to give this kind of declaration, what does it suggest to you?
It's just mind-blowing for a lot of locals to, first time in their lives to face the possibility of any kind of wars. But, the very important thing to keep in mind that this conflict is barely about ethnic lines or, language or lines. Russian language is not a problem in Ukraine in any kind of provinces. I'm a Russian-speaking, non-Ukrainian citizen that lived for 2 decades here, and I had literally never had any kind of problem speaking Russian or use this right to speak Russian, and it's not a problem here. I think the problem is that this very dangerous precedent when Russia is taking over another country's territory by breaking international law. And it's not a problem for those provinces to go in referendum and to vote to secession.